the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which DeVoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than Devoto. Devoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote Devoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, Devoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. Devoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources, or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. It's the end of the week. It's Anything Goes Friday, although the second hour of our program today, for the full hour, Congressman Ro Khanna, who represents Northern California, well, the Silicon Valley area, will be taking and is the co-chair, or excuse me, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be taking your calls for an hour. We'll do a national town hall meeting with Congressman Khanna. So that'll be in our second hour. And but you know, there's also a lot in the news. This is the end of the month. Today's the last day of July, and so it is legally, technically, you know, a lot of this functionally expired, you know, last week for all practical purposes. But basically, this is the door is closed, right? Next month, everything is different in that there is no longer any protection from being evicted for renters, and there is no longer an extra $600 a week in the paychecks of 20 to 25 million unemployed people. And the rationale, the reason that these Trump humpers are using to say we shouldn't be giving $600 a week to people who are out of work for no cause of their own, is that if you give people $600 a week, they will not work. They won't go to work. Now, there have been a number of organizations, including Economic Policy Institute and others, who have looked for any evidence, either in statistics or in actual anecdotal studies or even interviews of individuals, that would indicate that people are refusing to go to work because they're just, you know, turning that $600 into dollar bills, filling their bedroom with them, and diving in them like it's a money bin, like Charles Koch has, presumably. But they haven't found any evidence of that. But they hold to this. I mean, Mitch McConnell is essentially saying this week. You've got, FreedomWorks and other right-wing groups out, essentially saying this. This is the argument that was made by a bunch of Republicans on the Sunday shows last week. If you give people $600 a week, $2,400 a month, roughly, what would that be? In the neighborhood of $30,000 a year, they won't work anymore. Which raises an interesting question. If that is true, how far down should we cut the salaries of CEOs and senior executives in corporations to force them to work? How much should we be taxing the estates of rich people if we don't want their kids and grandkids a few weeks ago,
What used to be disagreements now become fights. What used to be fights now become fist fights. What used to be fist fights now become knockdown, drag out. What used to be knockdown, drag out now become shootings. What used to be just shootings now become murder. I mean, people are pressurized. People are under pressure. And that pressure increases dramatically when they lose their unemployment check. But do the Republicans want to address any of that? Oh, no. They want to say, murder is up. Therefore, let's send the secret police into Portland. And, child abuse is up. And, of course, it is. You would always expect that during circumstances like this. And there are a lot of things we could do about that. We could be reaching out to parents. We could have social service agencies have better funding. There could be programs in place, even using the telephone, reaching out to people. I mean, there are ways that we could do this, but the Republicans are not interested in that conversation at all. That would cost money, after all, and then you'd have to raise the taxes on billionaires to pay for it. No, instead, they just want to force kids to go back to school. So as that is happening, as literally, on TV screens all across America right now as we're speaking, you've got Trump-humping Republicans, rather pathetically, trying to score points on we've got to get kids back to school. As that came out, this study was published yesterday in the Journal of the American Medical Association's journal, Pediatrics. Pediatrics is the magazine that basically every pediatrician, every child doctor, or doctor for children in America reads. And that study in Pediatrics, there's an article about this in today's New York Times by Apurva Mandalevy. That study, quote, infected children have at least as much, now the kids don't get as frequently sick. Infected children have at least as much of the coronavirus in their noses and throats as infected adults. Indeed, younger children younger than 5, may host up to 100 times as much of the virus in the upper respiratory tract as adults.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, well, does that change anything, or are the Trump humpers still humping Trump? We'll be back. And welcome back. Sherry in Shelton, Washington. Hey, Sherry, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. The VP pick is on my mind, obviously. It's coming up. And we talked about this before, but I think we need someone who is going to supercharge the Democratic base and does not overly ignite the Republican base, and someone who champions the policies that help those who've been marginalized and affected by what we've been doing for the last 40 years. Well, and for many more way beyond that. But it's just, I think we really need to excite the Democratic Party. No matter how much everyone knows they want to vote, it still matters to have people wanting to actually do the work and make the phone calls and, just get them charged up, and not deflated.
So who's that person for you, Sherry? So who's that person for you?
For me, it's Elizabeth Warren, because she's got the policy positions that will help us all. And
I totally agree with that. Are you suggesting that if it's not Warren and it's a black woman or a woman of color, that's going to use your phrase, supercharge the Republican base?
I think it will. I think it might pull away some people who are already leaning like, okay, we can't do Trump anymore. But I didn't know we were this racist. I just had no clue. When Obama was running, I wrote a letter to my senators and said, we're beyond racism in this country. It's like, whoa, was I wrong? Yeah. But I just think, and her policies will help everybody. And there are some downsides to some of the other candidates. I mean, that you brought one up just a little while ago. The
it was Kamala Harris who let Mnuchin walk.
They're going to use that and go.
That's a small hit against her. There are hits against all those folks. I mean, Elizabeth Warren's got. There are things you can hit Elizabeth Warren with as well. I'm frankly to the point where I don't give a damn what the Republican base thinks. And I mean, screw them, right? And if I could say a stronger word on the air, I would. That's how emphatic I feel about the Republican base. They can just go screw themselves.
I had a really scary conversation with someone at Costco the other day. A gasoline attendant, and he saw my Bernie sticker, and he's like, "Oh, so who you voting for?" And he was real congenial, and I like to ask people, and then at the end, as he walked by my window, he said, "Yeah, if our homeboy doesn't win, there's going to be real trouble." And I thought, "Whoa, these people are scary." So.
Oh yeah.
I just think we need to pick whoever's going to make sure we win by big numbers. I mean, huge numbers.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It has to be an overwhelming repudiation of racism and fascism, because that's what's going on. It has to be an absolutely overwhelming repudiation.
Economic disparity.
But
we got here.
I'm at the point, Sherry, where I will take anybody for vice president.
I know,
I mean,
Tom.
like I said, I don't give a damn of what the Republicans have to say about it. And I can't think of a single person whose name has been seriously floated, who wouldn't energize and make enthusiastic the Democratic base. I've made no bones about the fact that for a long time, Elizabeth Warren has been my top pick. But that, I'll take anybody at this point. Pardon me, I got the hiccups. Sherry, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. 20 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday. We just had a caller suggesting that Elizabeth Warren should be the VP candidate. I'll take anybody. And she noted, well, if it's a woman of color, that'll activate the Republican base. I don't care. To hell with the Republican base. They can go screw themselves. I just don't care anymore. They have demonstrated that the values that they hold dear are racism, misogyny, and fascism, and I don't feel any need, concern to accommodate them to be, and frankly, I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of the Republican base getting all cranked up and all upset and all out there and demonstrate. Screw them. They are a small minority in this country. The Trump humpers in this country are a small minority. They're strutting around loud. They're trying to sound like and appear like they're much bigger than they are. But screw them. Bart in Randolph County, Indiana. Hey, Bart, what's on your mind? Bart?
Party chair for the. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can.
I'm the
get your mouth close to the microphone if you can, Bart. What's up?
I'm the local party chair for Randolph County, Indiana. We're in the middle of Trump land, and I just wanted to give some notes of progress that we're having on the local level. And I'm hoping this is happening all over the country. But we have the first African-American candidate in our county this year who also happens to be a woman. We have the first openly gay lesbian candidate in our county this year. And we have the first trans candidate in our county who, the research we've done, if he becomes elected, will be the first trans coroner in the United States.
Wow. And these candidates are all seriously competitive?
Yes. I mean, it's a heavy Republican county, but we have crossover support, and we're getting Democrats out of the closet to come out and fight for us and raise money for us. And I just wanted to let some listeners know that there are positive things going on, and there is some activism and some movement going on, even in Trump land.
Yeah. Good. Bart, thank you. That's great to hear. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Paul in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Oh, hi. I don't know. You probably don't remember. You might not remember me, but I called in a couple of years ago. I had an acupuncturist who was so good she could cure Republicanitis. I don't know if you remember that.
I do remember. Yeah, what's up?
But anyway, I'm a big Bernie supporter, and thanks to your show, I first heard about Bernie on your show with your Brunch with Bernie.
Brunch with Bernie.
But
yeah.
I want to let you know, and if you'd allow me to announce it, I'm extremely progressive. I've decided to run for a seat in the New Mexico House of Representatives for
Good on you,
district
Paul.
just south of Albuquerque. I'm a pilot and an engineer, so I've never really done anything like this before. But the Democrats couldn't find anybody else to run against the incumbent, so I said, what the hell, I'll do it. He's also a big Trumpster. He also won't talk to me anymore. 4 years ago, I tried to engage him in a discussion to hold him accountable for his votes, and he basically said, if you don't like how I vote, why don't you run against me? So here I am.
I love it. So, Paul, what's your campaign website for people who want to learn more or who might want to help you out?
It's votepaulk.org, VOTEPAUL. Just K.
I'm sorry.
Because my name is Paul Kinzelman. So the website is votepaulk.org.
Just the letter K. VOTEPAUL, the letter K.org.
Yes.
Right? Okay,
And,
great.
that-
Paul, I wish you the
spent a
very
lot of
best.
time with my positions. I spent a lot of time laying out my positions and philosophy. If you go to my incumbent's website, it's pretty glitzy, but he doesn't really say anything. Whereas I have a lot of progressive, where I'm coming from and all that stuff on there. So I'd like to encourage people to take a look at it and help me out. So I appreciate being able to do a shout out on your show.
That is
My
great.
second
Paul, thank
time
you.
calling.
Thanks for the call, and I wish you
Okay.
the very best of luck. VotePaulK.org. Paul, good luck, and keep us up to date on how it's all going. Charles in Summerfield, North Carolina. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Well, there's an interesting post online today showing a video of Trump trying to vote in person and how much he's struggling to do it. And
Yeah,
that
Louise was
brought up
watching
something
that this
that I've been right. It brought up something I've been thinking about for quite a while now. His not wanting to read, tearing up papers that were given to him after he, quote, read them. Has anybody even begun to look into the fact that this man might have dyslexia?
That would make a lot of sense, because he's apparently struggled with reading his whole entire life, having to hire people to take his tests for him. He hired somebody to take his ACT test. He probably throughout college. I mean, back in the '60s, and it was a big thing actually to hire people to sit in for you in classes and write your papers.
My father struggled with a mild form of dyslexia, and I didn't know it until I became older. But anytime he would sit down to read anything, it was like, okay, I'm going to go over here by myself, no noise, no distractions, and I'm going to intensely concentrate for the next hour or however long it takes for me to read the document. You put an engineering document in front of him or something that along those lines, and he had it in an instant, not a problem. And so that's why I'm beginning to believe that this man, and when he reads something and then tears it up, if somebody comes back, he says later that the paper said this and this, they said, no, it didn't either. And he says, well, prove it. And even if they come up with a copy, he can say, well, that's not the same thing that I read.
Yeah, so he develops these elaborate pseudo-realities around himself to cover up the fact that he couldn't understand what was written down because he can't read because he has dyslexia. Makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to remember.
I don't know what, if anything, can be done about it, but it would explain an awful lot.
Yeah, it would. And dyslexics very often have really great spatial intelligence. Like a lot of sculptors are dyslexics, but things tend to they have a hard time reading. And being a builder, you'd have to have pretty good spatial intelligence. Not that Trump has necessarily been a successful builder, but anyhow, Charles, thanks for the call. That makes a lot of sense.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Whatever's on your mind. We'll pick up your calls after this break.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. And Betrayal is the book.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of 2 very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science is a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just once again, in the event you missed it, first of all, it's Anything Goes Friday. I'm asking the question, if the Republicans are saying that $600 a week is too much for Americans because it causes them not to want to work, then how much should we cut the pay of senior executives, billionaires, multimillionaires? I mean, if $600 a week causes people not to want to work, how much wealth should we strip away from trust fund babies, from the children of very wealthy people who actually don't work? I mean, do we take them down to $200 a week, $100 a week? I mean, at what point, right? Or do we just acknowledge that that's a BS nonsense argument, number one? Number two, yesterday, the journal Pediatrics, I did not hear this mentioned in the hearings this morning, which disappointed me tremendously. I expected that Congressman Clyburn would lead with it. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it happened. But yesterday in the journal Pediatrics, which is published by the Journal of the American Medical Association, they reported on a study out of Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago that found that while children are less likely to have symptoms of coronavirus, they still get it. And quoting from today's New York Times, infected children have at least as much of the coronavirus in their noses and throats as infected adults. And of course, if it's in their nose and throat, when they talk, it's going to get in the air and you're going to get it. According to the research, indeed, children younger than age 5 may host up to 100 times as much of the virus in the upper respiratory tract as adults. So yeah, let's throw all those kids into a school setting and let them cough and play with each other and all that kind of stuff, and then have them go home and say hi to mom and dad, right? Makes perfect sense. And grandpa and grandma. It's pretty mind-boggling. I mean, it's extremely mind-boggling. And then, of course, Steve Mnuchin cut a deal where the post office got a $10 billion loan in exchange for giving up all their proprietary information, their secret contracts on last mile delivery, so that FedEx and UPS, once they have access to this information, can more effectively compete with and destroy the Postal Service. Thank you, Steve Mnuchin. But what's on your mind? Barb in Springfield, Ohio. Hey, Barb, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to ask you, this is a little off subject, but it is Anything Goes Friday.
It's Friday. There is no subject, right?
Right. It's a book that I read a long time ago called Black Like Me. I was wondering if you were
a teenager.
With that.
I read it when I was a teenager. That book came out in the 60s.
Yeah, right. That's when I read it, too. I'd just like a little insight on that.
it's been probably 40 years since I even thought about that book, but my recollection is that it had been essentially, this was the book where the guy took a drug that darkened his skin and then lived like a black person and was shocked by how terrible black people were treated.
Exactly.
And if I'm remembering the book correctly. Yeah, okay. And it turns out that there is no such drug and that the book was a work of fiction. That doesn't mean that it didn't have a very positive consequence on people like you and me, Barb, white people who read it and said, holy crap, I never realized how bad things are or could be for black people, because I think it was probably, a reasonably accurate portrayal, if not at a certain level, kind of a cartoonish portrayal, but nonetheless a reasonably accurate portrayal of what black people go through. But that's my recollection. I'd have to go back and look it up, but it's been a lot of years. But I think that the literature that we're getting now, and Barb, thank you for the call. I think that the literature that we're getting now that by black people describing the experience of being black in America is an order of magnitude better and more important and more consequential and more accurate. That was what it was at the time that it was. Gail in Alpena, Michigan. Hey, Gail, what's on your mind?
I wanted to ask, I heard a report on MSNBC that if 3 Republican governors don't accept, I can't remember the name of it, but if they don't accept the votes in their state, that there will be no election, that Trump will be president again.
Well, this is a theory that Republicans have been kicking around for the better part of a year that I know of. And that is that in the election of 1860, or 1872, I think it was the election of 1872, or maybe the election of 1876, Rutherford Hayes and Sam Tilden ran against each other. Hayes was the Republican, Tilden was the Democrat. Tilden won the majority of the popular vote. Tilden won the majority of the Electoral College votes, but Tilden did not ever become president. Hayes became president. And the reason why was because there were 3 states in the South that were occupied by the Union Army, and then Oregon was occupied by the Klan. These 4 states, the governors could not certify a particular slate of electors. And so the Electoral College, so neither of the candidates hit 50% plus 1 for the Electoral College. And under the 12th Amendment and legislation passed since the 12th Amendment that clarifies all that stuff, that means that the election then goes into the House of Representatives, where each state has 1 vote, and that vote is determined by the legislature of the states. And there's, I think, 29 or 30 states that have legislatures that are majority Republican. And so Donald Trump would get reelected. I didn't know that had made its way into the ecosystem of MSNBC. I've been talking about it on this program for a few months. We had a caller yesterday at the very end of the show who was saying, maybe not. It may not work out as easily as you're suggesting, and times have changed and there have been legislative fixes. But the fact of the matter is that none of that has been passed through the courts. So if Trump tries to pull a 12th Amendment trick by saying, if Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott, for example, say, well, here in Texas and Florida, enough electoral votes that nobody gets a majority, and I'd have to go back and slice and dice and see exactly which states would it take to make this happen. But if there's a few large states that say, we can't certify the vote, then the 12th Amendment could conceivably kick in, at which point there would probably be a lawsuit. It would probably go to the Supreme Court, and John Roberts and the 5, and his 4 Republican colleagues on the Supreme Court would decide who is the next president. And, we saw that movie before in 2000 when Al Gore won the popular vote by 500,000 votes, by 500,000 votes. And it turned out Al Gore actually won the election in Florida, but the Supreme Court stopped the recount, the recount that was mandated by the state of Florida's Constitution, because the election, was within 0.5%. And, the Supreme Court basically just said, oh, well, or the Republicans on the Supreme Court, it was, 5-4 decision. We will give, we will give this election to George W. Bush. And, that may well happen again. Gail, thank you for the call. That's what it's all about, though, and you can look it up. Cliff over at HartmannReport.com, you can plug in election, I think, into that search engine, and it'll come up. Cliff in Santa Clarita. Hey, Cliff, what's up?
Morning, Tom.
Hey.
Real quick reminder, Betsy DeVos said children are stoppers of the virus. Remember that?
I don't remember that, but I'm not surprised.
She said that like last week or something. She said children are stoppers of the virus.
Yeah, they don't stop it. They spread it. They just don't get
Exactly.
as symptomatic as frequently, yeah. Although we had a 9-year-old girl in Florida die just last week.
Yeah, she can lie just as good as Trump. Anyways, the two biggest contributors of greenhouse gas on the planet are us and China. We got this situation in the South China Sea with this military posturing, and our relationship just isn't good because of the trade deal. And all right, so if we need to work together, our two big countries, to seriously handle this climate change, global warming thing. Do you think Joe Biden can repair the relationship and really get substantive, work done on this crisis?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm hoping that nobody takes Trump's bait between now and January 20th, because there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to try to start, some variation on Reagan's little war theory, right? Reagan had his little war after Margaret Thatcher had such great success with the Falkland Islands, and her popularity went from in the 20s to up into the 80s as a result of this little military victory she had. Then, Reagan did the same thing in Grenada. Then his vice president, George Herbert Walker Bush, when he became president, did the same thing in Kuwait and Iraq. And George W. Bush, of course, had his little wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they turned out not to be so little, tragically, for us and for the world. So, and Trump was tweeting back in 2012 that, in order to get reelected, Obama is going to attack Iran. So we know that he thinks this way. I am just very hopeful that there is no country out there that will take his bait. That, how the way that, Michael Flynn reached out to the Russians when Obama sanctioned them after the election. Obama was still president, but Trump had been elected. And Obama sanctioned the Russians, and Michael Flynn reached out and said, "Don't worry, don't react. We're coming in. Don't worry." I hope they get that message, that same message. Don't worry, don't freak out, don't take the bait. Because the last thing we need right now is a world war, or even a small war, and particularly with Donald Trump at the helm. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday. Back with your calls after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And a reminder that our entire second hour today is going to be, as it is pretty much every other week, Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour, National Town Hall meeting. And welcome back, George in Los Angeles. Hey, George, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I'm a gay liberal from the Los Angeles area. This is about guns. It just seems like the liberal side has just become fanatical about disarmament. Us disarming. The other side isn't going to disarm. The wingnuts with QAnon and whatnot. And it just seems like dictators, the first thing they do is disarm the people, then they slaughter. It just seems like it's
well, actually, the first thing they do is not disarm the people. Adolf Hitler actually had shooting clubs. He was aggressively arming white Aryans. They did disarm the ghetto in Poland. I'm sorry?
Enabling law. Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I couldn't hear you. You were talking over me. But whether dictators do that or not, because if the argument that I have historically made is, if you think that your gun is going to help you when you're taking on the federal government, think again. They will always outgun you. It is going to be, it's a joke. And that was back when these right-wing militia guys were running around with their guns talking about, Obama's going to come and get us and we're going to shoot back. Well, now the threat is that, right-wing people are going to kill you in your home, or at your place of work or whatever it may be. And, should you arm yourself and be prepared for that? And I don't have a facile argument against that. Other than to point out that when a gun comes into a home, the risk of suicide in that home goes up 500%, and the risk of a homicide in that home goes up more than 100%. And
5,000% goes up, Tom, and people defending themselves from thugs breaking in and whatnot.
Well, thugs very rarely break into your house, George. The number of people who commit suicide with guns and the number of people who commit homicide with guns in situations where if there weren't a gun, there probably wouldn't have been a homicide, things like domestic violence and spur-of-the-moment fights and things. Those numbers are so much higher than home break-ins. This idea that somebody's going to break into your home and stick a gun in your face and rob and rape you and all that kind of stuff. Most robberies and burglaries in the United States are committed when people are not home, and it's probably one of the reasons why. George, if you're going to keep talking over me, I'm just going to hang up on you. It's probably one of the reasons why burglary is actually down right now. There's a whole spectrum of crime that is down right now, and burglary is among them. The one type of crime that is up right now is violent crime, and murder specifically. And like I said earlier, this has nothing to do, in my opinion, with guns or not guns, although we're more inclined to escalate things into the level of murder because of the number of guns that we have around. But, you can characterize yourself as whatever you want to characterize yourself as. I personally, I just don't see any advantage of it in having a gun. Which is not to say that I'm not entirely without protection, but I just don't think that this is a wise thing, broadly speaking, for Americans. And instead of talking about how everybody needs to be buying guns, which makes me very suspicious about who you really are when you call in and say that kind of crap, I think that we need to be talking about how do we flush these guns out of our society. There are more guns. The United States is 4% of the world's population, and we have 50% of the guns in civilians' hands. And that is not a good thing for our society. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before we know it. The hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment tells how the Second Amendment was written to protect Georgia's slave patrols. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and picking up your phone calls. Anything Goes Friday. Leslie in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Leslie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for keeping up the good trouble. I've got a few thoughts about these last 6 months till Inauguration Day. How much of the sky is going to fall? Who's in Trump's ear? How much more damage can he do going down? And then I keep seeing the term October surprise. Surprise floating around on the internet.
Oh, plan on it. Plan on it. There has not been a Republican since Nixon who didn't have an October surprise up their sleeves. But you know what? You asked some questions, Leslie. Are those rhetorical questions, or do you have answers for them, or proposed?
Yes and no. I think you have better answers because I just don't know what to think anymore. It's not that I'm telling you to do my thinking for me. I just have a bad feeling about this. I mean,
yeah, I do too. I do too.
Look at what just happened yesterday, and I knew that was coming. I think we all did.
Yeah. I think the good news is, when the co-founder of the Federalist Society, Stephen Calabrese, comes out and says, this is the co-founder of the Federalist Society. This is the group that vetted all these right-wing judges that Mitch McConnell has shoveled into our federal judiciary. The co-founder of the Federalist Society yesterday called for the impeachment and removal from office of Donald Trump for suggesting that the election should be delayed. He said, here's his actual quote. He said, until recently, I had taken as political hyperbole the Democrats' assertion that President Trump is a fascist. But this latest tweet is fascistic and is itself grounds for the president's immediate impeachment again by the House of Representatives and his removal from office by the Senate. So when you've got conservatives, this guy isn't even a Republican. I mean, he's beyond Republican. He's a hardcore, billionaire-loving, Trump-humping conservative. And when I guess he's not a Trump humper anymore. When he's saying that, it's time to impeach this guy, that it's serious. So, yeah. Thank you, Leslie. Thanks for the call. Robert in Montclair, California. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you. My question is, what do you think about Calvi Chapel promoting so heavily the Republican Party when I've been going there for years, and all of a sudden They're very biased and even attacking
This is your
the left.
church?
Yes. Yes, and for some reason they're even releasing. Our pastor, I don't want to name him because I still care about him, but why are they releasing personal opinions on YouTube that the Black Lives Matters it's not a good cause, and
It's time to find a new church, don't you,
very
Robert?
hurtful. I'm sorry.
It's time to find a new church.
Yes, but for some reason now, I think it would be in their best interest to, to unite people and not to separate them, because it's separating me, and I'm pretty sure it's separating a lot of people from the Calvary churches. So it just bugged me a lot, and I just wanted to see your comment about that.
It's illegal. Well, actually, if your pastor is going on YouTube and speaking as himself, then it's perfectly legal. If he's using church money, or if he's, in the context of his official duties as a pastor of the church, if he's promoting politics, he has broken a law that has to do with that would cause his church to lose its tax exempt status. You could document that and report it to the Internal Revenue Service. The Trump IRS won't do anything about it. The Biden IRS might do something about it. And, but step one for me would be that's the last time I walk in that church, and I would make sure that everybody knows exactly why. Robert, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
From now on, when Republicans talk about the post office, if it's safe enough to mail tax refunds, Social Security checks, stimulus checks, driver's licenses, Social Security cards, prescription drugs, passports, and voter registration ID cards, then it's safe enough to vote by mail, period.
Right.
And that's
common sense would indicate that, Robert. But I got an email this morning. I got one. Project Veritas is in on this now. Now you've got O'Keefe talking about how there's going to be millions of phony ballots, and there's hundreds of people or thousands of people who are registered to vote who aren't even still alive and don't even live here anymore. Well, yes, of course, that's true of every state in the union. It doesn't, and maybe ballots will be sent out to those people. But guess what? They're going to get returned. Undeliverable. It's like the whole thing is a joke. All these desperate attempts to try to stop people from voting. We've been voting by mail here in Oregon for 20 years. And there have been a half a dozen cases of documented voter fraud. And typically it's where, a husband voted for a wife or vice versa, and the spouse was unhappy with that having happened and busted them essentially. But I mean, that's about as bad as it gets. And the reason that Republicans hate this is because it's harder to deny people at the poll. It's hard when you're trying to stop somebody from voting by mail. It's a little harder unless their name is clearly recognizable. It's a little harder to know exactly what race they are or exactly what their politics are. And so, there we go. Rick in McKinleyville, California. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Hey, Rick. Good morning, Tom. I'd like to suggest a solution to getting out of the virus-caused economic problems that we're having. I think we should use the power of we the people to help to transfer the $15 to $18 trillion that has been transferred from the middle class to the ultra-wealthy in the last 40 years of Reaganomics. And what do you think of that?
All you have to do is reverse the Reagan tax cuts and every other tax cut that's happened since then, and we would be back in the economic system of Lyndon Johnson, Jack Kennedy, Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, and FDR, which worked. It built the middle class. It built the middle class very successfully and very large. The other thing you need to do is legalize unions again. I mean, between the Supreme Court and Republican right to work for less laws all over the country, our unions have just been terribly, terribly hurt. But yes, absolutely. Okay, coming up next, Congressman Ro Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be taking your calls for the hour. If you're on hold, Joyce will check in with you and make sure that you can ask your question of him as well as me. And then for our third hour, we'll be back to Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, never again. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler. Drug companies, health plans, patient assistance programs, and patient advocacy programs. And then
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday, although this hour we're going to take an hour and do a national town hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the Silicon Valley area of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. Congressman, welcome back to the program. Thanks so much for joining us this hour. And just for anybody who may want to call in, our telephone number, 202-808-9925. Congressman, I see that you, Senator Nina Turner, San Juan Mayor Carmen Cruz, and Ben & Jerry's co-founder Ben Cohen, the four co-chairs of Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign, are calling for the Democratic Party to put an explicit, unambiguous pledge of Medicare for all into their platform. Do you think that's going to work?
We're pushing it, Tom. I mean, it's common sense when millions of people are losing their jobs. They shouldn't lose their health care. And as you know, this has been part of our platform. It was part of our platform in 1976. It actually was still part of the platform in 1980. It was stripped in 1984 because of the Reagan Revolution. But Jimmy Carter ran and won on single-payer universal coverage. It was something that our party has fought for since Harry Truman. So all we're asking for is to go back to what this platform always should have been. There's 700 delegates of Bernie delegates who've signed this. And I think there's going to be a real push at the convention to have this included.
Great. And also I see that you and Bernie, you in the House, he in the Senate, have dropped a bill, masks for all. Tell us about that.
Well, the idea is very simple. We ought to be sending every American 3 reusable masks. Partly this will have information about why masks are needed, and the research shows that it will actually improve compliance. People, if they get it and they get the information, are more likely to wear the masks. And then in some cases, with essential workers and people who are doing work that's exposing them, we should be providing the masks. I mean, if their employers aren't providing it, which in some cases they aren't, our government can step up and do that. It's at less than 1% of our defense budget, and it would save lives. I think most people would say right now the biggest threat to our safety is coronavirus.
Yeah, amen. Congressman, those are my questions. I'm curious if, before we pick up your phone calls here, and people are stacking up right now to talk to you, if there's anything in particular that you wanted to direct our attention to before we begin.
Well, of course, the big work this week is on the stimulus, and the arguments that progressives are making is we should not compromise on the $600 a week. I mean, that is necessary. We need to get a stimulus. I mean, some of us have been calling for a recurring stimulus, and we need to get money for state and local government, and we should not be giving some blanket immunity or liability to corporations. We're not keeping workers safe. So I've been pleased so far that Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer have held the line, and I really think we've got to get a bill that helps workers.
I understand that the Republicans are saying that the reason why $600 a week is too much is because that's enough money that it causes people to say, I don't want to look for work. I'm fat and happy here with $300 or $600 a week. If that's the case, what should we cut CEO and executive salaries down to incentivize those people to work? If $600 is too much, should we cut CEO pay to $400 a week?
That's a funny way of looking at it, a good way of looking at it. The reality is we're in a pandemic. Look, I think it's an absurd argument even in normal times because I've yet to meet people who wouldn't want the dignity of a job and the security of a job compared to the uncertainty of $600 a week. But at a time where you have 5 times the job seekers to job openings, and where literally a lot of restaurants and a lot of businesses can't open, it's absurd to say that people should go find work. Where are the jobs?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Although, Republicans will tell you that rich people don't need an incentive. You don't need to give them extra. Well, actually, they say you do need to give them extra money. It's circular logic. Anyhow, let's pick up phone calls here. John in Huntsville, Alabama. John, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, gentlemen. My comment is this free market capitalism that we've been dealing with for the last 40 years has not been working for the people at all. And Republicans keep saying they want this to run as our country to run as a business. If it's a capitalist business, there should be a profit. So I say we call their bluff at this last big poker hand, no limit poker tournament here, and we use the DNC used the campaign of capitalism for all. That if we're going to be run as a country, the people, there's profit from a business, and the people who should be reaping the benefits from that profit is we the people. We should get a ROI, our return on investment. What do you think?
Well, John, I definitely think that we need to have a return on investment to people on a lot of things that we do, certainly starting with the investments in National Institute of Health and in a lot of the drugs. I mean, those are done by tax dollars, and yet private pharma companies are allowed to price gouge on them. That is one place where people should have a return. We ought to be putting money into our education, our child care, our health care, so that the gains of the economy are actually investing in our people. But I definitely think that to the extent we have capitalism, it has to be stakeholder capitalism, which is that every American and every worker has a stake in it, not shareholder maximization, which we've seen in the last 30 years.
Chuck in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I want to know, how can the Democratic Party allow the government of Kentucky to only have one polling place for 800,000 people? How is that illegal, not illegal, and why aren't they doing anything to punish them for it?
Chuck, this is my biggest concern with the election, that we're going to see state governors, state legislatures in Republican states close polling places, make it hard to vote, call into question the legitimacy of elections. And this is the fight. And this is why you saw President Obama at John Lewis's eulogy in what I thought was a very moving speech talk about how the work of civil rights and voting rights is present. It's not something we're studying about in history. I mean, this election is going to be about voting rights and disenfranchisement.
Don in Harrington, Delaware. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman Khanna, Senator Warren, Senator Sanders, during these primaries, endorsed progressive candidates running against in primaries against corporate Democratic congressmen. Can the Progressive Caucus look into and endorse Jessica Scarane, who's running against Senator Coons, who is a corporate Democrat? Jessica Scarane endorses everything that Senator Sanders and AOC. She's an FDR Democrat. Thank you.
Don, I'm happy to take a look at it. I haven't followed the race and happy to look at it with other progressives. But absolutely, I mean, I've endorsed against incumbents where I've thought that there are progressives running, and I know other Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have done that, as Pramila Jayapal and Mark Pocan. And if there's a good candidate who is fighting for progressive values, that getting more of them in is going to make it easier to get these things enacted.
Congressman, we just have 20 seconds to a hard break. How do you see this election playing out?
You know, Tom, I waver. I waver between sort of an optimism and where the polling looks good. The party, I think, has come together quite well. A concern on turnout, and my two biggest concerns are both the voter suppression and the polling still shows that young voters and young Black and Latinx voters aren't that motivated. And I think we've got to make sure that they turn out. I'm skeptical that we can keep the Republican moderates. I mean, I'd love to, but I think we really need the turnout to be strong.
Yeah, amen. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's a national town hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents Silicon Valley in the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. And welcome back. Edward in Capistrano Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Okay, I just want to give you a thought, and then I'll take the answer off air. I was thinking going into October, it would be good to have public hearings on the dismantling of the pandemic response team and getting those players in there to inform a lot of people in the United States that don't understand what happened there, because we wouldn't be going through this if that was in place. Thank you very much.
Going through what? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I dropped him.
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
Going through coronavirus, just the whole crisis, I think is what he was talking about.
Yeah, well, I think the issue is that there's some very basic things we can do. We can all be wearing masks, which is where Bernie and Sanders and my bill is. We shouldn't have reopened. I mean, in my own state of California, we should have listened to people like Dr. Sarah Cody in Santa Clara, not reopen those bars and restaurants and indoor dining as quickly as we did. We have to move back to phase one in this country, and we need to follow the guidelines on schools and not rush to reopen them.
It seems like a good idea. Joe in Cupertino, California, you're on the air with who I assume he's your congressman.
Good morning, sir. My question is, this morning I was listening to Congressman Claiborne at the meeting, and the difference between a first responder, like a firefighter, paramedic, like an EMT or a nurse, and an essential worker. I think that there's a big difference. I mean, sending everybody back to work at Tesla and 130 people come to come down with COVID, is that an essential worker or is that an emergency worker? I don't know. I just wondered if we could get some clarification, because I think putting people at risk for profits is not really in my best interest of the country.
Joe, I agree with you, and I think this is why California has had this outbreak. We made exceptions for people like companies like Tesla that we shouldn't have. That's not essential work. I mean, essential work is people who are getting us food, people who are getting us medicine, people who are taking care of individuals who are sick. The idea that businesses have used these loopholes and then they aren't having the proper PPE equipment or the proper protection is partly what's led to these dramatic increases in cases and deaths. I mean, other countries aren't having this issue.
Justin in West Hills, California. Just a minute to the break, Justin. Quick one.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call. I wanted to talk to you guys about the Democratic National Committee platform that meted on Monday, which rejected an amendment calling on the party to support marijuana legalization as an official 2020 policy plank. And this is very, very important, and it goes to Congressman Ro Khanna's previous statement about how he is worried about getting the vote out. This is an issue that 2/3 of Americans support, and this is insane that we have gone back from 2016 where it passed by one vote. And in that same vote, in that same 2016 committee, they voted against hemp. But now in 2020, we can't pass marijuana. This is nuts. Thank you for the call. Thank you for
Congressman, real quick.
Justin, I share your outrage. I mean, we should have passed it. It makes sense. It's a racial justice issue. And I do agree with you. These are the things that will frustrate young people. And we can't be taking young people, voters of color, for granted. We've got to get a big turnout. So I share your frustration on that issue.
Amen. Me too. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. You can support our program by supporting the station you're listening to right now and thanking our sponsors for advertising with us. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. It's astonishing. Just think about this. This year alone, with this one source of revenue, according to Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, this year alone, we could fund tuition-free college for all, eliminate child hunger, ensure clean drinking water for every American household, build 500,000 affordable housing units, provide face masks for everybody, produce the protective gear and medical supplies our health workers need for the pandemic, and fully fund the U.S. Post Office. Now, what is this magical thing that we could do that would produce enough money to do all these things? Fund the Internal Revenue Service. Republicans have cut its funding so badly since 2010 that fully 1/3 of their enforcement is no longer happening. And tax cheats have walked off, or they're basically refusing to pay over $260 billion in taxes this year. You can hear the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Aaron in Vancouver, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call, and thank you for your service, Representative Khanna. So Tom has pointed out time and time again that the moralistic arguments for progressive policies don't really sink in with a large portion of the country who are sociopaths, including, obviously, some Dems who are opposed to Medicare for all. So I'd like to hear a preview of what arguments the progressives are prepared to make about to the sociopaths who don't care about lives over profit.
We're listening.
Well, I mean, I think what we have to do is tell people what the country wants. I mean, it's obvious that the country wants health care for all, expanding Medicare to everyone, and we need to get over some of the myths. This idea that Medicare for all would hurt jobs. Actually, that's far from the case. It would create jobs because it would lessen the burden on companies and small businesses of healthcare premiums and allow them to hire more people instead of offshoring jobs. We have to overcome this idea that somehow you're depriving people of choice. You automatically enroll everyone in Medicare after 65. I've never heard a senior complain about that and saying they've been deprived of choice. All we're saying is we're giving people that option that seniors have. So
we have to continue to make the arguments. The truth is on our side, and keep pushing for it. But I understand the frustration, and I agree with you that the insurance industry is very powerful. They put a lot of money in, and they have a lot of people afraid.
And my apologies. I thought she said she was going to offer some. I missed a word in there. Anyhow, Carol in Valencia, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I am very concerned about Trump losing and the right-wing militia that is armed to the teeth. They are not making it, they're not keeping it quiet. Their idea is they're going to have a revolution. And, of course, it only took 10% of our country to go into the American Revolution. That was and they have 30 or 40%. What are we doing about that? What is Congress going to do? Will the police support us, or will they support them? Will the Army back us up?
Well, Carol,
Who could have imagined we'd ever have to worry about this?
Yeah, no, but I think it's a legitimate fear that you have a very polarized country. You have the president stoking fear, already diminishing the validity of the results, setting it up to say that it was stolen, it was robbed, and it's a volatile situation. I think we have to be focused on first protecting the right to vote, protecting efforts at suppression, and then make sure that we are in a position to have order and not allow the subversion of democratic processes. I mean, it is a very scary time for the country.
Don in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you for taking my call, Congressman. I was wondering in the new stimulus package if recent college grads and the inability to get jobs will be addressed. I believe 18% of recent college grads are homeless. My son just graduated with a master's degree and can't get a job. So I'll listen for your answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don, and I appreciate that about your son. I've heard this from a lot of folks in my own district. I mean, people are graduating, the jobs just aren't there. I think this is why we need to have student loan forgiveness. This is why we need to have some massive public works program. I've called for a digital public works corps, that there are a lot of digital jobs that we need. Why not have the federal government create those and put people to work and get some of these young college graduates doing things? But I think we're going to need the federal government to step up to help create these new job opportunities for people and to forgive loans and to provide some stimulus in the meantime.
James in Hollywood, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good day, Professor and Congressman. Congressman, we need a standalone bill. I spoke to Congressman Program about it, and he said, yeah, $25 billion was in the big bill. We all knew that would never see the light of day. Have a bill on Monday or when you come back on Tuesday, and $25 billion for the post office, standalone, bring up the vote instantly, count the votes, and make it public. And there's your campaign. Shame, Moscow Mitch, to bring it up. Voting by mail is twice as safe as voting. Voter fraud is a Republican hoax. Voter fraud gets you 5 to 15.
Yeah. James, I want Congressman Khanna to have time to answer your question.
James, I agree with you. I would support having a separate bill, and let's put people on record on where they stand, and let's make people vote against funding the post office. I mean, it's a complete Republican attempt to prevent voting and to privatize the postal service, and we should expose it and not let it stand.
Yeah, I was so pleased to hear President Obama call that out in Congressman Lewis's funeral yesterday.
Yeah, no, he gave a very strong speech. I mean, it was great. He called out the filibuster.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Ro Khanna, the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents California, Silicon Valley in the House of Representatives, taking your calls for the hour.
Today we're reading The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence by Michael D'Antonio. This is from the first chapter. For decades, Pence had presented himself as a humble servant who could be entrusted with power because he was at heart a mild-mannered Midwesterner. Friends and foes alike said his major character trait was extreme niceness. When given the opportunity, Pence described himself as a true Hoosier, son of Indiana, who was a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. This is how he had introduced himself to the country at the Republican National Convention 6 months earlier. The list contrasted with the usual pledge politicians make to put country first. This is what President Obama did after the 2016 election when he said, "We are not Democrats first, we are not Republicans first, we are Americans first." The vice president's self-declared identity revealed both his priorities and the source of his power. For 30 years, he had helped lead the Republican Party into a closer alliance with preachers who were turning evangelical Christianity from a religion into a political crusade that engaged in a culture war with non-believers. The aim of many was to destroy abortion rights, roll back the equality gained by gay citizens, and prepare the nation for the second coming of Christ. Pence and others used martial metaphors and considered themselves warriors of the Christian right, both besieged and called upon to fight. Quote, "Those who would have us ignore the battle being fought over life, marriage, and religious liberty have forgotten the lessons of history," said Pence in 2010. "America's darkest moments have come when economic arguments trumped moral principles." Pence's allies in his war included hugely wealthy donors who, despite their vast wealth accumulated at a time of historic inequality, also posed as victims. As libertarians in the mold of Ayn Rand's cardboard characters, they felt inhibited in the pursuit of even greater riches by a government that imposed foolish regulations and would redistribute their wealth to the supposedly indolent poor. Starting with this perspective, they denied the science behind environmental protection, demanded tax cuts for themselves, and insisted on massive reductions in programs serving anyone who wasn't rich. The victimhood claimed by both the libertarians and the Christian right permitted the construction of an alternative reality that denied their own power and masked their ambition to make politics and culture conform to an ideology that included white Christian supremacy and predatory capitalism. It also denied the progress they had made in their construction of their own political might. With his oath of office, Vice President Pence became both the free marketer's hero and the most successful Christian supremacist in American history. Most of Pence's life had been preparation for this moment, and possibly one more. His lifelong goal, set when he was a boy, was the Oval Office itself. Remarkably, he had reached this point by tying his fate to Donald J. Trump, a man whose immorality in the form of lying, cheating, and deceiving in every aspect of his life, from marriage to his businesses, had made him a living exemplar of everything that Christianity and conservatism abhorred. However, this record also suggested that Pence was more likely to assume the highest office in the land than most vice presidents who had come before. To put it bluntly, Trump was vulnerable to impeachment. If this occurred, Pence would see the hand of God at work in his elevation to the presidency. In the meantime, he would wait and watch. On Inauguration Day, with Pence looking on, a slightly stooped Donald Trump stepped forward when it was his turn to face the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts. Beside Trump stood his wife, Melania, the former fashion model, who held two Bibles, Lincoln's and Trump's own. At the stroke of noon, the president-elect raised his right hand and placed his left on the Bibles. As he did this, Trump's family members and hundreds of political and government figures strained to see the moment. Trump and Pence were a study in contrast. At age 58, Pence appeared trim, perhaps even athletic, and could have passed for a man 10 years younger. His jacket was neatly buttoned, his hands were clasped at his waist, and his smooth face was set in a half smile. Mere feet away, in some, he resembled a small-town pastor, or maybe even a funeral director. Mere feet away, a stern-faced 70-year-old Trump stood with his coat hanging open like a caftan to reveal a long red necktie. Despite much cosmetic intervention, he looked old and tired. At the conclusion of the presidential oath, which had been voiced by 44 presidents before him, Trump said the words, "So help me God," and accepted the congratulations of those closest to him with a thin-lipped, toothless grin. He then delivered a 15-minute speech replete with distortions and falsehoods that were his trademark. He declared that America was awash with crime and despair and under constant attack. "This American carnage stops right here and stops right now," said Trump. It was the most remembered phrase of the address. That was some weird S-word, former President George W. Bush was heard to remark as he left the inaugural stand. Weird was the mildest word that one could attach to the 45th President of the United States as he launched an administration that would be stained by scandal and corruption so broad it defied a citizen's ability to grasp. Cronyism, secrecy, and nepotism would flourish. Presidential lies, daily cataloged by the Washington Post and others, would come at the rate of more than 150 per month. From the moment of his oath, Mike Pence, the vice president, faced the historic, some would say daunting, challenge of dealing with an erratic and undisciplined commander-in-chief. The book, The Shadow President, The Truth About Mike Pence.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. "34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. California's Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour in our national town hall meeting here on Anything Goes Friday. Chara in Rockwall, Texas. Am I saying your name right? You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes. My question is, why doesn't the Democratic Party explain the number of people that have died from the COVID in context of airplane crashes? So if we've had 150,000 people die and there's an average of 200 people per plane, that would be 750 crashes in 6 months. I mean, that is an astounding number. So it looks to me like that would be a good way to relate to people the severity.
I appreciate that. You know, I mean, I think that there has been a numbness, a desensitization to the loss of life. When 1,000 people are dying every day, and as you put it, that would be like 3 major plane crashes every day. I do think we need to emphasize that this has happened and it's avoidable. I mean, that's the sad thing. It's avoidable. You know, I mean, I wish my colleague Louis Gohmert well. I don't think, you know, I have nothing but hopes that he recovers. But the fact that he is going to the Congress and not wearing a mask and then announcing that he has coronavirus with his staff without putting a mask on, I mean, this is behavior that is totally preventable. And it's leading to people getting sick and, in some cases, people dying. And we have to tell people what's going on.
George in Rotunda, West Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, my question is, if the Democrats take control of the Senate and the White House next year, is there a plan to rebuild the VA healthcare system, you know, fill the 50,000 jobs that's missing there?
George, I do think there is. I mean, it's not just the VA system where we've got to fill the jobs. It's so many federal agencies. You've seen the State Department hollowed out. You've seen EPA hollowed out. You've seen the Justice Department in places hollowed out. I mean, you've seen a systematic assault on governing agencies that the Trump administration has undertaken, which is why it's unfathomable to have 4 more years of Trump. I mean, he would really just totally erode the governing agencies. So absolutely, we need to hire back people at the VA, but also in the other agencies.
Michael in San Antonio, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman
Tom, Congressman, appreciate you guys taking my call. I have one question. So for the last couple of years, we keep on hearing about the GOP dragging big tech guys in front of Congress and testifying about conservative bias over Twitter, Facebook, and whatever and whatnot. When are the Democrats going to start dragging in the people from iHeartMedia and Sinclair and asking them, hey, why are you guys canceling all these progressive radio shows across the iHeart format, Sinclair format, or whatever it is? Because I listen to iHeart, and I would get Tom, Stephanie Miller, all of them on iHeart. But then slowly but surely, they started dropping radio stations on iHeart. We all know why they're doing it, but why don't you guys fight fire with fire, turn around and do exactly what the GOP are doing to the big tech guys and drag iHeart and Sinclair in front of Congress and demand answers? Tom?
Got it. Thank you, Michael.
That's a brilliant point. We should. I mean, the reality is, I mean, look, social media and tech has its issues and definitely needs to be regulated, but there is cable news, there is right-wing talk radio, there are the local news broadcasting like Sinclair that have totally shut out liberal information. Tom, I'd love your perspective on this. I mean, I keep hearing from people that the left talk radio and radio programs are not nearly as prominent. You obviously are one of the people who have succeeded. I mean, what is your view about the structural challenges that we may face?
What I have learned in the 16 years I've been doing this show is that platform is everything. CBS put me on a big station in Seattle real early on. This was like back in 2005. And in fact, they were programming that against an Air America station. And we just did really, really well. We beat Limbaugh in the ratings constantly. We were on a big stick, a big station. And the echo of that, even though that station got taken down when CBS got acquired by Cumulus, maybe, 6, 8 years ago, the echo of that is that we still have a huge audience in Seattle, and now they listen on KBCS and a few of our other nonprofit stations. Platform is absolutely everything. And as a result of media consolidation, which is largely the result of the 1996 Telecommunications Act, you have companies that have a political agenda. I have sat with one of the vice presidents of Salem Radio. He's, we're from a Bible publishing background. We'll never have a liberal on the air. I in the office of the United States Senator, sat with one of the owners of a network that had over 800 stations in the country, right-wing radio on about a third of them. And he said he would never put a liberal on the air because liberals want to raise his taxes. We know the story with Murdoch, with Fox News, and you know the story with Sinclair and things like that. But platforms are huge. And so if you don't put people on the platforms, if you control the platforms and lock them out, then it's real easy to say, oh, yeah, that never works. So, yeah, that's my take.
No, so I think it's a great suggestion, and I'm going to talk to David Sisling that we ought to be looking at the broader media landscape as well that's keeping a bias against liberal.
I can tell you this, the progressive stations that are doing well that we're on in Chicago, it's locally owned. In Minneapolis, it's locally owned. In Los Angeles, it's a nonprofit station. It's locally owned, essentially. And other stations around the country. Most of the independent radio stations that we're on.
Is that a big issue?
iHeartRadio is the remnant. It's the remnant of Clear Channel, and they've got, 700-800 stations around the country, and I think that we are on one or two of them. They just shut down our San Francisco affiliate a couple of weeks ago, which was catching quite an audience. We were getting a lot of calls from San Francisco out of that. And so now a lot of those San Francisco people are shifting over to YouTube, or they're going to Sirius XM or Free Speech TV. People will continue to listen. But it really is the platforms, and this is, I've got a book out in a couple of weeks about monopoly. Ralph Nader wrote the foreword to it. There's a whole chapter in there about this. But basically, what's happened is
I'll read it, and I think we ought to. I think Nicole made a great point that we got to. We should have had the hearings on tech, absolutely, but we need to have hearings on this as well. The other parts of our country that have been monopolized.
Yeah, I would do it about media ownership though, because when you have local ownership of radio and television stations, you have diverse programming. When you've got national ownership, no, the predators end up winning the show. Judy in Denver, Colorado, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thank you. All the media needs broken up. But my question is, the post office has been paying more than $5 billion into a pension fund for 14 years now. Why don't you stop that payment? And the only entity in the world that has to pay this for more than 75 years pension worth. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this very well. I'm nervous. And end that program that no other entity in the world has to do and give them half that money back, because it's almost $80 billion that's there. Give half of that money to the Postal Service, and they'll be fine. Quit allowing the Republicans to make them pay this $5 billion every year.
Got it, Judy. Or give them all of that money back.
Yeah. Well, Judy, first of all, you did great. I appreciate it. You're making exactly the right point. And people don't know, but this was not some law passed a long time ago. This was George W. Bush that recently passed this law requiring the post office to pay for up to 75 years of people's retirement security. And it was an absurd law. It was never done before. And Bush and those around him basically wanted to find a way to privatize the Postal Service. And so we need to make it clear that that's what the constraints are on the Postal Service. Their agenda is privatization. When FedEx can deliver letters at 50 cents across the country in 3 days, we can talk about privatization. They can't. Obviously, there's a reason we have a postal service, and that's because people shouldn't have their mail be contingent on their wealth. So as it is, we've got in this country our health care, our education, our jobs, so many things contingent on our wealth. The last thing we need is now to have our mail contingent on our wealth.
Congressman, 25 seconds to the break. Trump is clearly trying to attack the post office. Are the Republicans on board with this?
Yes, I think the Republicans have been on board with the privatization of the postal office since Bush. I think the one risk for Trump, I mean, since 2006. I think the one risk for him is that he may actually diminish the vote by mail for Republicans in the election. But I think he thinks that's worth the risk of diminishing the turnout from our side. Look, in a conventional election, everything goes according to plan. He loses. So he's trying to take any risk, and he'd rather diminish turnout on both sides.
Yeah, so he can claim fraud, and God only knows.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the congressman from Silicon Valley, is Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls for the audience. Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Jonathan in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman Khanna. I was excited to hear about your Masks for All Act, and I wanted to know if you're acquainted with what the country of Taiwan is doing. They have a system called a name-based mask distribution system. It's part of their national health care system, and the national health insurance pays for masks, and people order them either online or with an app or call. They make so they don't have to wait online. They're available in all the convenience stores like 7-Eleven. And I just wanted to know if you're aware of what Taiwan is doing, because they're also donating 2 million masks to the United States.
Yeah, well, thank you. We were aware of Taiwan, and it was part of the research towards this bill. And I don't think we should adopt everything that Taiwan's doing. I mean, some of their digital surveillance, I think, violates privacy. But I do think in the case of having a culture of everyone wearing masks and providing people with masks, that's something our country should absolutely do.
Cassandra in Camas, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, both of you gentlemen. I have a suggestion, and I would like your opinion about it and think if it's something that is even realistically a possibility. We have less than, 90 days or so to the election. At this point, I think it would be an amazing feat if after listening to President Obama's speech yesterday at John Lewis's funeral, if we were to take the power of past presidents and the power of current congressmen and senators, Democrats mostly, obviously, and put it behind the Black Lives Matter issue and say we need to make this the focal issue of our country right now, because it is at the core, in my opinion, of what is rotten in our system, which leads to all the disease in capitalism and this sense of competition, which inherent in the word of competition is there's a winner, there's a loser. And obviously black people have been the loser for 400 years plus. What if you were to take the power of all of you representatives and politicians, not be the voice, let the Black Lives Matter people speak, but stand behind them and make it something that people saw on their televisions, on billboards, anywhere, plaster it so that they understand this is what we're fighting for, which is our integrity, our dignity, and our humanity. And until we address the core of this and let that stone ripple out from the dropping of it into the water to have some positive thing happen instead of all the negative things, we need to be able to link fascism and everything else to this. But it is still the core of this problem. And I'll take mine off the air, but thank you, gentlemen. And please, what do you think?
Well, Cassandra, first of all, I share your view on Obama's speech, and I think your point is that the core of the problem, if I understood, was the sense of having some stakeholder society where we don't just have excessive extractive capitalism, exploiting people, exploiting workers, exploiting people based on race, that we have a sense of building a much more just and equitable economy and society. And I absolutely think that has to be our mission, and particularly post-COVID has to be our mission in reconstructing a far more equitable economy.
It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour, our national town hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. Latest hidden history books on monopoly and oligarchy, wherever fine books are found. Welcome back. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hello, Congressman. What I am concerned with is the rumors I'm hearing about a bill being presented that would eliminate any corporation doing business in the United States of having to pay the contribution, their share of the contribution into Social Security. This is
there was an op-ed pitching this in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, by the way, Norma.
Yes. And you see, this is actually the only benefit any of these hourly wage employees have. Once this is eliminated, a corporation like Walmart or Amazon would have an immediate increase of profit at the bottom line. And this would eliminate any obligation to an American citizen that they employ or to the country. This would slowly defund Social Security, and it will eliminate the only retirement program that American citizens have, because so many retirement pensions have already been stolen. Is this going to be allowed to destroy what's left of the economy? Because people like me on Social Security, we will never again be able to go shopping. So retail will also tank, which will destroy a lot of jobs and businesses across the country. Are y'all going to allow this to happen, or are you going to stand up and fight to stop this?
No, we're going to do everything we can to stop it, and it's never going to happen as long as Democrats control at least one branch of government. I mean, there's no way we're going to allow for corporations to stop paying into Social Security, especially at a time where corporate profits are a record high. Amazon is one of the richest companies ever in the world. The least they can do is pay for Social Security. They frankly need to be doing a lot more, like providing a livable wage and having health care benefits that are adequate until we get Medicare for all. So I agree with you. You can rest assured I don't think there's a single Democrat in the House or the Senate who would in any way support that measure.
Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Khanna. My question is, we all know the number of deaths in the United States, but what I'm not hearing is the number or the percentage of people who are either temporarily disabled or permanently disabled after they recover from COVID. Thank you.
Steve, that's a really important point. In fact, my wife and I were just talking about it, and she said, that no one is talking about the permanent damage that may happen because of this disease. We just don't know. We unfortunately know someone who had COVID early on. They were in the hospital, they recovered, but they still have lingering impact. And I think when you look at that issue, it's probably another couple 100,000 people who have been affected by this and who may have current health issues, and in some of those cases may have ongoing health issues. So it's absolutely something we need to discuss. And what we need to discuss is what are we going to do to help those individuals recover to the extent possible.
Philip in Island Pond, Vermont. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I'm really well versed on history, and my big concern is, my question is, what are the progressive representatives doing to convert the centrist Democrats? There's over 100 of them. They just voted to increase the defense budget, and I mean, if that doesn't change, not much is going to get done, even if the Democrats do take the presidency. And some other things. If the centrist Democrats continue along, the same old is going to happen. So what are the progressives doing to help at least shift the thinking of these people?
Well, Joe, I tried my part. I co-chaired Bernie's campaign. We tried to get him to become president. And, in seriousness, we came very, very close. I mean, it was, Bernie won in terms of votes in Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada, and if there was a different outcome in South Carolina, I think he would be the nominee, and I think he'd be the president. So I say that to say that the progressive wing of this party is in the ascendancy. We're fighting a neoliberal party that the ideology of 40 years. But we've made a lot of progress, and I'll give you a concrete example. I had an amendment to stop the modernization of the ICBMs. The ICBMs are the biggest threat to nuclear war, because at least when you have a submarine or if you have an aircraft have a bomb, you can call them back. And an ICBM, you launch it, there's no calling it back. And so we worked with Bill Perry to have that amendment. Bill Perry said, you're probably going to get 3 votes on this. We lost in the House Armed Services, but we had 11 votes to 43, and even Adam Smith, the chair, voted with us. That's how we build. We just have to keep pushing. The fact we got 93 votes this time against the defense budget was better than last time, and I'm confident eventually we'll prevail because the truth is on our side.
Rich in Bay City, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. We have
yes, Congressman. We know that the postmaster is eliminating overtime and the mail is piling up. Is there any way that we could ask retired postal workers, especially from about October 1st to December 3rd, to volunteer without pay and to handle all the mail-in ballots?
Rich, I appreciate that. I think the issue is that they're doing this deliberately. They're doing it deliberately, partly because of the election, and they're doing it deliberately because they want to tarnish the reputation of the Postal Service. I mean, the reason every American likes the Postal Service is most Americans know that you put something in the mailbox and it's going to get to where you want it to go, and it's going to get there reliably. But if they can't do it, if there are delays, if their mail isn't getting delivered, then suddenly people are going to start losing confidence in the Postal Service, and that's going to give them an argument for privatization. So this is a cynical, deliberate strategy to erode people's trust in the Postal Service. And what we need to do is pass legislation to require them to not make these cuts.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Khanna, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's always great talking with you.
Tom, thank you. Always get great ideas from your listeners.
Thank you. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program in just a moment. Coming up on the top of the hour here. Stick around. We'll be right
back. You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Sally Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws, but talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives conspiring with their Republican allies built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees donate to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with the conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation, after 1995, into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And so let's just dig right in and pick up your phone calls here. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say that it wasn't exactly true that they merged in Taiwan. I'm talking about in Taiwan, that they, were really invasive in their privacy of merging cell phone data into a person's account and into their public health record. That's what they did. It was between immigration and the healthcare service of Taiwan. They did it for a few weeks, only to contact trace. It was a very efficient way of contact tracing. And, I am a civil libertarian, but, I do think that was a good way of contact tracing because, this is an exceptional situation, a pandemic. So I don't condemn Taiwan for doing that, and I think the result was that they only had like 8 deaths out of 25 million and very few cases. They were, I think, the most efficient country in locking down the virus, and as a result, they never had to lock down the economy.
Yeah, they did a spectacular job. Completely agree, John. And this is, we established here in the United States back in the, I think in the early 19th century, that public health laws trump privacy laws. And,
yes. I didn't know that.
I mean, in fact, I believe the Supreme Court heard a case on this that had to do with venereal disease.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this goes way, way back. It goes back to the era of tuberculosis. Yeah, absolutely. Straightforward stuff, in fact. Okay, John, thanks for the call. Fritz in Palm Desert, California. Hey, Fritz, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I would like to suggest that the Democrats in the House put forth a bill that would fund and require ballots to be sent by each state to all the registered voters. Those states then that don't want to have the votes returned by mail could simply have their voters walk in, show their ID, and drop off the ballot quickly, safely, securely. Let the Republicans fight that idea.
Well, actually, in one state, you've got Republican legislators trying to pass a law making it illegal for there to be drop boxes. Number one. Number two, you've got some states who have state laws and in a couple of cases, state constitutions that make it very, very difficult to vote by mail. So I don't think that, given the 10th Amendment, I don't think that a federal law would be able to blow that up. But, it's a great idea. It's a great start. And H.R. 1, the first piece of legislation that passed the House of Representatives when Nancy Pelosi took over the House at the beginning of this congressional term, a year and a half ago, H.R. 1 addressed these issues and provided for election security and would have worked. But Mitch McConnell, of course, will not allow this to come up in the United States Senate. I am convinced that McConnell is every bit as much in the pocket of foreign oligarchs, multiple foreign oligarchs, multiple countries, as is Donald Trump. And they just don't care about democracy at all, about our republic, frankly. Nathan in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Nathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Okay, a couple of years ago, I talked to you about fascism and the 14 little check marks. You know what I'm talking about.
The defining characteristics, yes.
How many check marks are left? Would be my question.
We're there. We're there. If you take the list that that Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum has, a bunch of people have taken photos of that list. That's, and I'm not sure if it's from the one in Jerusalem or the one in D.C., but they've posted them online. They're all over the internet. And we are in the midst of a fascist a coup in the United States, and it's not complete yet. But it is way farther down the road than I think most people realize, and this is not good news for the United States. We have to push back and
the definition of
do so quickly. Whoop, I don't know what happened there. Hang on just a second, Nathan. Let me put you back on the air. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
you're back. What's up?
No, the definition of fascism. Being the merger of corporate and state interests.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I just wanted to make
absolutely.
Sure that. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about the Democratic platform and how it appears to be an empty gesture with the experience I had with my congressman, Kurt Schrader. He said they pay no attention to the platform, and it seems like a waste of energy for the progressives to have spent all this time fighting for a platform that the party really ignores, or at least this one congressman we have ignored.
Well, Kurt Schrader is a conservative. He's the only, I believe, the only person, the only member of Congress. He represents where I used to live in Southern Portland, and Northern Oregon, whose primary challenger I put on the air twice. He didn't win. Schrader won the election. He's an incumbent. He's got massive advantages. Just because Kurt Schrader is a lousy Democrat doesn't mean, or not a progressive, shall we say. He's up for sale, and takes money from corporate interests, and then dances to their tune. Just because Kurt Schrader does that, and not an insignificant number of other Democrats do, doesn't mean that we shouldn't get this stuff in the platform. Single payer health care has been in the Democratic Party platform since the late 70s or 1980. It's been there for a long, long time. Harry Truman was the first to introduce it. Sometimes things take time. You still keep making your statements, right? You continue to say, no, wait a minute, this is what we believe. We have to have these statements of belief over and over and over again. Penny in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Penny, what's up?
If you think that Donald Trump is a nightmare, wait until 2024 when Rick Scott runs, who is a senator now from Florida.
I don't think Rick Scott would have as much luck. Rick Scott has been able to basically, he was involved in a massive multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar Medicare fraud. Him and his company was convicted of the largest Medicare fraud in history. He walked away from that with I believe, over $100 million. Used that money to become governor of Florida, then used that money to become United States senator. I don't think that he could play in the really big leagues. I don't think he could run for president. But I think Tom Cotton is going to. And Tom Cotton just, nakedly displays his fascist tendencies embraces his fascist beliefs. So I'm with you. Trump is incompetent. Wait until a competent fascist comes down the road. Chris in Brooklyn, New York. Got a minute to the break, Chris. Quick one.
Okay, on June 1st, Tom, Trump declared war on the United States when he cleared Lafayette Park. Well, the Natural Resources Committee finally had a meeting about this when Bill Barr was smirking his way through his lies and testimony. And people have to go and look at this. There's 2 hours of the acting chief Monahan dissembling, lying, denying. And then the third hour was the major from the National Guard. And his testimony was far more credible. And he also didn't believe there was a riot that day. He thought they overreacted. And he also found CS canisters, so.
Yeah.
At least
there was tear gas. Yeah, there are a few voices willing to tell the truth. And what Donald Trump has been doing is he's been weeding them out, getting rid of them as rapidly, as aggressively as he can. And it ain't good. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind today? We'll be back. It's helping you win the water cooler wars. 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Your media support group for We the People. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Henry in Atwater, California. Hey, Henry, what's on your mind today?
I'm wondering why the Democrats don't play a little role reversal here with Trump and offer up legislation to allow universal absentee voting, because he thinks that's the best, that's the greatest, and that way we save ourselves from the horror of mail-in voting.
The problem, we had a caller earlier who talked about this, Henry. The 10th Amendment basically gives the states any power that is not specifically defined in the Constitution for the federal government. And that includes the power to run elections. So some states have this baked into their constitutions, which means it'll be very hard to get out. Other states simply have passed laws to make it harder to vote by mail. Louisiana, I believe it is, requires that your vote by mail be notarized. Several other states require that you have a witness sign it. There's just it's scattershot. In New York State, you have to have basically an excuse. In Texas, you have to have literally a doctor write the excuse for you, or a second party, an authority figure say yes, this is what. I mean, well, I don't think that there's any federal legislation that can fix that.
Right. Do it at the state level. You would have Trump more than likely supporting it because he'll never figure it out. He'll support it, which gets his supporters support. Democrats would support it because they're saying, really, this guy's going for this?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so do it at the state level. Yeah, it's harder. It means having to do
it. But the problem is with doing it at the state level is you can't. All the states, not all the states. New York has some big problems in this regard. But most of the states that have these really onerous, vote by mail hoops to jump through provisions are Republican-controlled states. And the Republicans are very happy with fewer people voting. I mean, Paul Weyrich in 1980 said, frankly, our leverage in the elections goes up as the voting populace goes down. And that has been the Republican mantra since 1980, and it continues to be their mantra. And I don't see Republicans at any point saying we're going to make it easier to vote, ever.
Well, so, yeah, but they're scared to death of Trump, and if he supports it in their states, a lot of them will fall into line. Well, anyway, just thought.
No, it's a great thought, Henry, and this is where Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in H.R. 1, the first piece of legislation, House Resolution 1, literally the first bill to pass the House of Representatives, that got sent over to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell has refused to even allow it to be brought up in committee, much less bring it to the floor of the Senate. H.R. 1 would have provided money to states to secure the vote. It would have stipulated that if you are, registered to vote, that your vote has to count. It would have amplified the right of people to vote. It would have made voting by mail easier in those states that don't have specific laws against it. And it would have encouraged those states to change those laws. It would have made it illegal for the kind of out-of-country voter election meddling that we saw in the 2016 election when Russia, billionaires in Israel, Saudi Arabia, Seth Abramson wrote a book about this, Proof of Conspiracy. Numerous countries involved themselves in our elections. Now we hear from the Intelligence Committee that both Russia and China are involving themselves in this election. I mean, this is not good. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Anything Goes Friday. Taking your calls. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. So we need to be thinking right now about how to Trump-proof the presidency in the future. I mean, Donald Trump is causing all kinds of chaos and disasters, and things are, frankly, I think, going to get much worse before they get better. And I don't think they're going to get better until after January 21st or January, noon on January 20th. And that's assuming that, absolute craziness doesn't happen. But, there's a bunch of steps that we need to take, from recalibrating or fixing how we do our elections, to fixing how we handle money in politics, to fixing the pardon power of the presidency, to specifically saying that if a president is found to be a criminal, he or she can still be held to account. I mean, just straightforward stuff. And we need to be getting ready to do this. I lay it all out in a new video for people who support our program that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back to Anything Goes Friday. Robert in Price, Utah. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Do you believe that we're going to experience a tsunami of medical bankruptcies due to this virus? And what do you think that's going to do to us?
I think that's very possible. That's one of the areas where there has been an absolute dearth, an absolute shortage, lack, absence of statistical data. I've never seen, maybe it's out there and I just haven't stumbled across it, but I spend a lot of time every day reading the news, and sometimes reading rather obscure news. And I've never seen an analysis of how much this COVID crisis is costing American healthcare consumers in terms of, you get the anecdotes, the one guy who got his COVID test and, showed up at the ER for his test and it was $3,200. Or the guy who just got discharged from the hospital and he got a $1.3 million bill for the 2 weeks he was in the ICU with a ventilator. You get these anecdotes, but I don't know how many people this is going to be in total. I don't know if it's going to be, obviously it's going to be a problem, and obviously it's already a problem for many Americans. And as it moves into red states where you have much, much higher levels of people who are uninsured, don't even have Medicare in most red states, then it's going to get even worse. But Robert, if you can find any numbers on that, I'd love to see them. I think that it's coming. Robert, thank you for the call. Zeke in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Zeke, what's up? By the way, Zeke, here in our town last night, the feds did not come out of their building. The state police provided security, and there was no violence.
Well, imagine that. Imagine that. Tom, the reason I called, a couple of weeks ago, I heard you say, kind of offhand, that you thought there was going to be an October surprise involving a vaccine. And I'm here to tell you that you had it exactly right. And I have done some research. And here's the deal. On the 22nd of April, there was a phone conversation reported in the UK Telegraph newspaper. Quote, Boris spoke to Donald Trump to discuss coronavirus and international trade. Now, we have to put it in context. On April 22nd, the virus
Boris
was
Johnson,
raging.
the UK.
Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, spoke to Trump on April 22nd to talk about the coronavirus. And we have to remember that the coronavirus was raging out of control at this point in both countries, and both of these guys had their right-wing boy parts in a crack because they had mishandled their response to the coronavirus. So Boris says to Donald, and I'm just speculating here, but this is what happened. We've got these people at the Jenner Institute, Adrian Hill, et cetera, at the Jenner Institute working on a vaccine. My man, Matt Hancock, my Secretary of Health, has completely trashed all those bothersome regulations about vaccine development. How would you like to have 300 million doses delivered to you in October? And Donald says, Yahoo. Now, May 15th, the National Institutes of Health, which is headed by this guy, Francis Collins, who is a total Trump lackey, they announce, and this is key, that the monkey trials that were conducted at a research facility in Montana had shown that the rhesus macaque monkeys given the vaccine from Jenner had prevented transmission in the monkeys. It was a lie. It was total lie. Dr. William Hasseltine, an American science legend, wrote May 16th in that well-known purveyor of lefty propaganda, Forbes magazine, that all of the monkeys that were given the Jenner vaccine got the virus, every one of them. And they lied about this in a May 15th press release from the NIH. Now, you have to ask yourself, why would a British outfit that routinely heaps scorn on American scientists like William Hasseltine, and they have done this, why would they bring their vaccine to the United States of America for the monkey trial? Well, because Donald Trump has figured out that he can reach into any crevice or cranny of the executive branch bureaucracy and destroy anyone who displeases him. And the people in that bureaucracy know this. So that's why that was done.
Yeah, I don't think we need to get all this complex and convoluted, Zeke. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is that you don't know if a vaccine offers protection until people have been vaccinated, circulating in the population for a couple of years. Right? Or at least a year. And so it's just, even if everybody in America was vaccinated by October, we have no idea whether that's going to produce long-term immunity. Plus, you've got people who are, wary of these vaccines in general, and then you got the specific. But I'm very concerned that they're going to roll out some, half-baked, half-assed thing. And in fact, I think we can predict it, Zeke.
What it's going to be, Tom, it's going to be presented to the American people who are just absolutely dying for hope. I mean, there's a lot of despair in this country. And I don't think you can underestimate the effect that this will have. And I tell you, I've got this all in a document. Right. I've got this all in a document, and if you will give me off the air a valid email address, I'll email you the document, and you can consider
I can't, but you're welcome to
down.
Tweet it to me, Zeke. That's the best way to get things to them is to tweet them, or find a friend who can if you don't tweet. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it if such a thing is even possible? This is the nature of the nuclear era. And the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? This is the Thom Hartmann Book Club, the book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
In this week's Science Revolution, concerning news that we may have hit a tipping point for methane in the Arctic. Professor Richard Wolff drops by to discuss a pandemic tax to help fund the COVID-19 recovery for the common good. Kevin Camps of Beyond Nuclear visits to connect the FBI raids of the Ohio House Speaker to the billion-dollar bailout of two very dangerous, age-degraded nuclear power plants. And in Geeky Science, there's a new study out about how sitting confuses your body's fat or fit system. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Goes Friday. We're taking your calls, and Tim in Swansboro, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. We had an incident of COVID in my family. So it was my daughter, 19. So as she started to come out of all the symptoms and everything and started to feel good, called the CDC to find out about protocol. And this is my question. They said that you only have to do your 10 days of quarantine, and then after that, you don't have to retest, or you will just continue to pop positive for a while. And I said to them, so that means everybody's on the honor system? Do you have any clarification? Do you know anything about verification on if somebody's recovered from COVID?
Tim, the CDC has been hopelessly corrupted by Donald Trump and his buddies, and any suggestion that they're going to make to any member of the public is going to be the lowest common denominator type of suggestion. It's going to be the thing that they can say and will work in a state where they're aggressively trying not to test people versus a state where they're aggressively trying to test people. So, if you're getting nonsense or nonsensical information from the CDC, I wouldn't be surprised by that. Keep in mind, this is a disease that can kill people and that leaves many people permanently disabled. And so, if it requires an extra week or two of quarantine to be a little more safe, a little more certain, or forcing another test, I would do that. If it was me, my family. I can't give you advice, but just because the CDC says don't worry, be happy. I would not be happy. Am I making sense?
All right, I felt pretty much the same thing. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good to hear from you. Ron, in Berrien Springs, Michigan, or is that Berrien Springs?
Berrien Springs, Michigan, Tom.
Berrien, I thought so. So what's up, Ron?
Tom, I don't think it's any coincidence that Trump released Roger Stone, an admitted agent provocateur, at this time to foment destruction, violence, and sabotage to ensure that Trump is reelected. And I can't remember, but Roger Stone's actions go back with Manafort to, I know, at least Liberia, where they interfered and they had a terrorist agent provocateur operation going on in other parts of Africa. So their use of violence, or his use of violence in his organization, is not this smiling old man who's too old to go to jail. He is an admitted terrorist, and
this is back in the 80s, and people forget that the political consulting firm that these guys started was called Stone Manafort, wasn't it, or Manafort Stone? I mean, they were business partners. So. And they were selling. They were political advice for hire to some of the worst dictators and most violent autocrats in the world. So it makes perfect sense that they would do everything they could to help Donald Trump.
Yes, Tom, and he also was responsible or part of the Brooks Brothers riot down in Florida to stop the vote count between Gore and Bush. And Kavanaugh was one of those Brooks Brothers pounding on the doors to ensure that he got his Supreme.
Kavanaugh and Roberts weren't down there pounding on the doors. They were meeting. They had 50 lawyers down there who were prepping. I'm forgetting his name. Was it Olson, the lawyer who argued the case before the Supreme Court?
Theodore Olson.
Right, and Theodore Olson. You're right. And because Roberts and Kavanaugh had clerked, Roberts specifically had clerked for Rehnquist, and Kavanaugh, I forget what Kavanaugh's background was at that point. Maybe he was just a volunteer lawyer. But both of these guys, I mean, this is why George Bush made John Roberts Chief Justice. It was thank you. It was John Roberts' argument that won the day in the U.S. Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore in 2000, when the George Bush campaign argued before the U.S. Supreme Court that if the vote was recounted in Florida, as the Florida Constitution requires, and as the Florida Supreme Court had required, if that happens, it will, quote, cause irreparable harm to plaintiff George W. Bush, end quote. And, sure enough, it would have. It would have found that Al Gore won the election, which is what they determined, when they went on and actually counted the vote. So, yeah, Ron, I think most Americans are unaware of an awful lot of this history. It's really unfortunate. Dave in Torrance, California. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I think one of the lessons we can take from this coronavirus issue is that we can realize when American leadership is missing, we can with American leadership we can achieve so much, and when it's missing, we may suffer as a result of it the most, like it did in this case. I believe that, like last week, I even asked, what if Hillary Clinton was the president? I believe if she was president, even though I'm not her fan, she's such a workhorse, this disease would have been stopped right in China.
I agree. And we would not have left the Paris Accords, and Iran would still be in a box and would not be developing nuclear weapons, and North Korea would have been chastened. And I agree. I'm not Hillary Clinton's biggest fan either, but she understands how government works, and she's competent. And what we have right now is a guy who and an entire Republican Party, frankly, by the way, who don't care how government works and who don't care even for competence. They just want to get more money for their billionaire buddies and deregulate more industries. Rich in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to tell you that I heard on another free speech. Listened to Randy Rhoads said yesterday that the postmaster, she said that there's reports that the ballots are sitting on pallets, and basically the directive is not to get them out. And if they do get out when they're processing, to come back in. The other thing,
it's worse than that, Rich. The way it's working, I just retweeted this. The Postmaster General is shutting down mechanical sorting machines, the automatic sorting machines that have made our post office the envy of the world, and telling postal workers you have to sort these by hand, which slows it down radically. And then is also saying, oh, and by the way, no more overtime.
Yeah, well, I was telling, and even if I was telling Joyce, here's a frightening thought too, Tom, that if people are waiting in line peacefully, what's to stop the stormtroopers, the SS troopers, from shooting and thugging people and actually going after people that are sitting in line peacefully waiting to vote? I mean, they attack people. They put kids in cages. I wouldn't put anything past this guy. And as far as what the Federalist judge, Tom, saying he's got his judges in. I think why wasn't he saying anything when Trump was up for impeachment?
Well, he's got buyer's remorse, obviously.
All those guys forward.
He's got buyer's remorse. By the way, yesterday on National Public Radio, I believe her name is Jenny Durkin, the mayor of Seattle, was on saying that, in her opinion, the occupation of Portland and Seattle was a dress rehearsal either for Election Day or the time around Election Day, or, I think this is the case, or for the protests that would erupt when Trump tries to steal the election by claiming fraud right in front of us all. I mean, he does this stuff right out in the open and just dares you to do anything about it. And when people show up in the streets and protest, that's, I think that's when they're going to be coming down hard on us. Rich, thanks for the call. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I remember it was perhaps 2 weeks ago, Joe Biden said that Trump was going to try to postpone the election, as well as other people were making that same prediction. Now, and then Trump saying that that's not going to happen. It's crazy conspiracy theories from Sleepy Joe. And then now here we are that 2 weeks later, and then Trump tries it. So I for one, would trust, quote, Sleepy Joe more than I would Dreamer Donald. I'd rather have a good night's rest than having to encounter any further nightmares, if you get my point.
I do. And, Joe Biden wasn't my first choice to be the Democratic nominee, but he's a damn good man. And, frankly, any Democrat, this is what I was saying earlier, people were calling, about their choice for vice president. And the stakes are going up, by the way. In the last 48 hours, I've gotten a couple of emails from Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, and just 20 minutes ago, I got one from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I think they're testing to see who generates the most response, the most engagement, the most money, frankly. I suspect they have not yet made their decision, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I'll vote for any of them. I'll take any Democrat right now, period.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. And let's see here, James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Let me say first, I got a question for you, but a small statement first. Anyone who thinks that the president should not be indicted because he's too busy obviously misunderstands the role of the vice president. And though I know it's Mike Pence, and in this case he might be the vice president, that's what he's there for. Don't they understand that much about the government?
Well, A, and B, all you have to do is look at Donald Trump's schedule. The first 6 hours of every day are executive time. He gets to watch Fox News.
Ain't that true? The question is this, Tom. Do you think that at the time Governor Bill Clinton was unaware that horrible Republican cocaine was coming in through Mena, Arkansas?
I don't know. I've heard those allegations, and I just don't know, James. And I'm not frankly, interested in relitigating the Clinton years. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I think one of our key challenges that we can agree on is that we need to increase the voices of the left in the media, on the radio. Your show is great. But my question is, what do you think of the idea of creating an alliance of progressive groups, leftist groups, and starting our own radio stations? Bring together labor, environmental groups, civil rights, BLM, indigenous groups, whoever, come together. And those groups fund, it takes time to do this. But if we do it as an alliance, it's almost like an organizing project in itself, but we end up with, we can control the content.
John, you are describing what happened here in Portland, Oregon. Jefferson Smith, who had been one of the co-founders of the Bus Project, had been a state legislator, had run for mayor and other things here in Oregon. Got together a bunch of people. Frankly, I wasn't there at the beginning. I don't know the origin story altogether, but I know that Jeff Smith played a real big role in this. He's the guy who fills in for me when I'm, out sick or on vacation. He and a bunch of people got together and they started a station, a local station, X-Ray FM. And they started out as a low power FM, and now they're buying an AM station here in town that they're going to, which will be a much bigger stick, and many more people will be able to hear it. They have now a sister station in Vancouver on the other side of the Columbia River, that is carrying most of the same programming, but they're starting to develop their own programming. Low power FM, in particular, for urban areas, is a really cool thing. I mean, you could throw a signal into 1 million people, and with a transmitter that just costs a few $1,000s and a bunch of volunteers. So, John, your idea is brilliant, and it's being done. KBCS, the station that you're listening to us on, is a campus station, a college station that is doing just absolutely great work too. And there's a bunch of college stations around that are underutilized or not being used in ways that could be generating revenue for the college and helping our democracy. So there's lots of opportunities. So,
okay, great. John, I'd like to get in touch with Jefferson Smith. Thanks.
Yeah, X-Ray FM, XRAY.FM is their website, and I'm guessing all their contact information is right there. And they can tell you what they did and how to do it. And in fact, I've put several people over the years in touch with Jefferson. We'll be back. We're coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here, the home of the political revolution. Back with more of your calls on Annie Goes Friday right after this. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court tells the story of Nixon and Reagan's committing treason to steal the White House. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Tim in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Tim, what's up?
How are you, Tom?
Well, what's on your mind?
A couple things. I live in a red state, and I'm considered an essential worker. I work 3 jobs, one of them being one of the large box-style stores. Anyway, the problem that the people in the red state are having with this $6 per week that's going out to unemployment is, there's a couple 22-year-olds. Here's an example. A couple 22-year-olds get laid off from a restaurant. They were pulling down maybe 150, 200 a week as a part-time worker. They're getting $2,400 a month. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm not even coming close to what these kids are making. I'm 58 years old. I've got a disabled brother. I've got, I rehab wildlife.
Tim, you're making a really good argument for us to raise the minimum wage. Right now, the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour federally. And if we want to have, this Republican argument just makes me crazy. Oh, gee, we're on unemployment. We're giving people too much money. And so they're making more than people who are employed. Then why don't we raise the pay of the people who are employed? You've got, the biggest corporations in America right now are showing obscene profits. The 3 or 4 richest people in the United States have made almost, I don't recall if it was $1 trillion or $400 billion, some mind-boggling amount of money just in the last 4 months since this virus started. It is absolutely obscene. And to have Republicans call into this show or have anybody call in and say, oh, gee, we shouldn't give all this money to people. They're not going to want to work. Right. I'm not buying it. Valerie in San Diego. Hey, Valerie, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to let everybody know so that people can quit worrying about it, that if you are homeless, you can vote. And I looked it up online because in San Diego I found out that I can. But online it says all 50 states, all you have to do is give a proximity of where you are staying in general. And that's so, it can district you. And so you get your mail-in ballot, because that's, of course, how you would have to do it. And the way you can also, what I've also seen in California, you can actually vote ahead of time because you can go down to, this was before the virus, of course, but you could go down to the registrar of voters office and drop off your ballot there, or you can also vote there ahead of time.
Right. And with the population, the homeless population in the United States going from being a fairly small, marginalized population to being a very substantial, over the next 3 or 4 months, I think we're going to see an explosion in homelessness. This becomes an even more urgent issue. Thank you, Valerie. Chuck in Chicago. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I was reading on, I believe the site was Mediate. They said that Kushner and Trump did not have national testing strategy in April because it was only affecting the blue states at that time. I think it's something we all
Jared
know.
Kushner made this argument.
Right.
Several people have come out and said this was Kushner's argument. It's only killing people in the blue states. Yeah. Let's just blame it on Cuomo and other blue state governors and step back and don't do anything. And that's why we're in the situation we're in right now. Yes, everybody except Jared Kushner has said that that's what Jared Kushner said.
But I would argue that that's not just impeachable. That, by definition, is a war crime and needs to be called as much. That's no different from some two-bit African, or some two-bit African dictators starving his political opponents. There's no difference.
Yeah, or a South American dictator, or pick your country. Right. Yeah, and that's exactly what we have. Is we've got a two-bit dictator here. Chuck, I'm with you. I think it's a crime also, and I hope it gets a hell of a lot more publicity. Don in Tacoma. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to say that even though it's as bad as it is, a lot of people listen to you, and I think it's a good idea for you to say something. If we don't try to get people in office who are willing to do something about working with the other side, we're going to end up with the same problem 4 years from now. And so, it's good that we get our ideas in there and our people all lined up, but we do need to try to find those that are willing to meet us halfway and work with them.
I absolutely agree, Don, and I think we can do both. We can walk and chew gum. Todd, you got the last 30 seconds in Rockford, Illinois.
Hey, Tom, I was just wondering if your thought if we could get our Democratic leaders to somehow persuade Captain Chaos to have all the kids get tested for COVID before they go back to the schools that he's trying to force us all to putting our kids back in school.
Yeah, here's the problem. That testing will be useful. The information you get from that testing will be useful for about, 3 days? 4 days?
Well, it's better than nothing, though.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, we should be doing testing every single, if our schools are going to be open, which number one seems to me crazy. and particularly given this report that came out this morning from the journal, or yesterday from the Journal of American Medical Association, that children under 5 can have 100 times more virus in their nose than adults who are equally infected. That's crazy. But the way to do it would be to test every day in the schools. And had Trump back in January, February, March, April, May, June decided that, yeah, we should do that, let's use the Defense Production Act, we could, anyway, you know the rant. Special thanks, to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Dave Fulton, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, and Jabbermocky, the folks who helped make this show work. And to you, special thanks to you for being with us. Tell your friends about us. We'll see you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Tag you're it.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at buyraycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code Tom.
We say fight back!